All right. Um, Something really interesting on climate change is happening. This is the biggest story in the world, and it's not reported. These are the fun ones. The biggest story in the world, and the first time you're going to hear it is from me. You ready? This is kind of fun. You may not even hear this on the regular news, maybe not even once. And it's because of the way I'm going to frame this and put it together. President Trump, one of his biggest weaknesses is his statement from long ago that climate change was a hoax, a Chinese hoax. And of course, he has paid for that statement forever. And something's happening. Watch this. I'm going to give you some data points and then connect them. Are you ready? Data point number one. I think it was a week or so ago, Trump was being interviewed by somebody, I don't remember, and whoever it was said, you said that climate change was a hoax. And then he responded to that. How did he respond when an interviewer said, you said climate change was a hoax? He said, and I'm paraphrasing, this is not his exact quote, and he said, no hoax. Those words, no hoax. There's no hoax. And then he quickly said what he wanted to say about clean air and clean water. He usually frames it that way. It's not, he's not focusing on the CO2 content. He says clean air, clean water, we get to the same place. So data point number one, he has expressly disowned his own choice of words from long ago that was really hyperbole, that it's a hoax. But has he completely released? Because the hoax covered 2 points. One of those points was that China is cleverly agreeing to the Paris Accords because it's good for China. They get lots of freedom to do what they want, but it would be very restrictive on the United States economy, and that would be good for China. So China is sort of cleverly going along with this because they know it's just bad for our economy. It has nothing to do with the environment at all. That's the hoax part, is China's intention. Now, I'm not saying if it's true or false. All I'm going to say is that there are 2 parts to the hoax. The second part is the question of whether the science is right, or right enough that there's a big problem there. I believe the president, quite cleverly, is in the middle of an historic pivot that he will never call a pivot, but just watch the data points coming together. Are you ready? I believe he's going to loosen up on part of the hoax. In other words, he'll probably keep going with it was good for China's economy and the joke was on us. If we stayed with the Paris Accords, the climate accords, the joke would be on us. And that's sort of, I think he's going to keep that framing. But he's starting to release on the question of the scientific validity of it. And he should, because the scientific consensus is pretty darn strong that there's something to worry about. Data point number 2, over at Davos, the president has signed on to the trillion tree plan to plant 1 trillion trees by 2050 around the world to help absorb CO2. Why would the president of the United States sign on to a deal to help plant 1 trillion trees unless he had bought into the concept, and he's telling us right now, that there's too much CO2 in terms of the risk to the climate? Why would he say yes to the 1 trillion trees unless he's pivoting, evolving to the view that, well, trees are good, clean air is good, we like trees. It's probably not that expensive in the big scheme of things. It's not going to hurt our economy. But it feels as though no, I'm not mind reading. I'm just giving you the data points. You can do all of this without the mind reading. So we'll speculate. All right? So let's call this speculating, which is always fair. Mind reading is not. Mind reading is when you're sure you see something in there. I'm not saying that. I'm looking at the data and saying, well, it looks like this. All right? Here's another data point. Kevin McCarthy is part of a group who are putting together a group to talk about, let's see, McCarthy held a caucus event on climate change Thursday. What? Kevin McCarthy, a high-ranking Republican, is having a caucus event on climate change? Do you have a caucus event on climate change if what you're really trying to say is there's no risk here, there's no problem? No, you don't. So suddenly the president is not calling it a hoax. The president is signing on with no fight. He's fully embracing 1 trillion trees, which you don't need to do unless there's a real problem. And then Kevin McCarthy, high-ranking Republican, of course the president knows what he's doing, because they're at that same level. I mean, the highest level of the Republican Party. Why would he hold a caucus event on climate change unless he thought that was real? Why would he do that? He wouldn't. Again, we're speculating, not mind reading. And here are the points that his little group, let's see. He's a House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, and he's working with Representatives Garrett Graves and Bruce Westerman. And the three of them are proposing policies that focus on 3 efforts. The first is the capturing of carbon dioxide. And part of that is the 1 trillion trees, but another part, I assume, I didn't see this expressly, but one assumes that all of the startups that have machines that can directly suck the carbon out of the air is going to be part of that. So why would the House Minority Leader propose policies for capturing carbon dioxide if he didn't think it was a problem? He would. He wouldn't. All right? So Republicans have, it seems to me, at the leadership level, have clearly embraced that the scientific part, and again, watch me closely, just the scientific part looks valid in terms of the risk. The second part is promoting clean energy. They're looking to expand tax credits for carbon capture, typical Republican stuff. And the second part of the plan is the promotion of clean energy, which includes investments in doubling of investments. If the proposals go forward, it would be a doubling of investment in clean air research and lowering taxes for companies that export clean air tech. That's interesting. If they export the clean tech, in other words, it's the other companies, other countries that probably need it more than us. If they export it, they get a tax break. That makes sense. That at least the incentives are in the right place. But here's the other part. Nuclear power and natural gas are also featured in the plan. But what I hate is that it's like the last sentence on this thing. Nuclear power and natural gas. Now, natural gas is less polluting than coal, for example, and we got plenty of it. So it's a good interim fuel. So if you're using natural gas, you're still adding CO2, but not nearly as much as coal, for example. And maybe you do that for a while until you can get your nuclear stuff going. At the same time, over in Davos, I saw mention of this, but have not seen the actual quote. So I need a fact check on this. I think Mark Schneider is trying to get a fact check on this as well. Did President Trump mention nuclear and Generation 4 nuclear at Davos? Because that's a claim I saw on the internet that is unconfirmed at this point. Now put the points together. President says it's not a hoax. Still, the China economy part is still a little hoaxy, but not the science. Trump says okay to planting 1 trillion trees. No reason to do it unless there's too much CO2. No reason. Trump apparently doesn't have a problem with, and I assume they're coordinating this, the House Minority Leader McCarthy, GOP, having their own Republican version of climate change combat, to fight it. Am I wrong that this is the biggest story happening right now? The biggest story is that the GOP just embraced climate change and is acting aggressively to combat it, but doing it in a Republican way, not a crazy way. The crazy way is you get rid of all your airplanes and your cars and we all ride horses and, stuff like that. How long have you been waiting for this? My God. The GOP has had this big gaping hole in their portfolio, which is just crazy talk about climate, when the whole time they could do stuff that was completely Republican that would at least make their case stronger, and now they're pursuing it. So I would say that the GOP is taking a path on climate change, which in my opinion is way stronger than the Green New Deal, which feels impractical. The stuff that Republicans are suggesting seems completely practical, 100% practical. But here's the kill shot. Are you ready for this? I want you to parse the president's words about it. So he was talking in Davos, I guess. And he wants there's a lot of focus there on, quote, a cohesive and sustainable world. So it's a big theme over at Davos at the conference. And so Trump announced that we'd be joining the 1 trillion trees initiative, blah, blah, blah. And then he went on to say, and listen to the exact words, it's very important. Trump said, to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. So he's not talking about what's true or false in terms of the science. Look how carefully he's chosen his words. To embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, and I assume that would mean, nuclear, green technology, all the possibilities tomorrow, good economy, all those. To embrace that good future, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. And he goes on. There are errors of yesterday's fortune tellers, so he's demeaning all the people, all the doomsayers, and we have them, and we have them, meaning the United States, and I have them, meaning the United States, and they want to see us do badly. Well, no, they don't. But so that part you should ignore. That's just a political statement. Nobody wants to see us do badly, except maybe China. But we don't let that happen. And here's the kill shot. This is from President Trump in Davos. Quote, "This is not a time for pessimism. This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process." Wow. Because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. How many times have I told you that President Trump learned at the knee of the greatest, the greatest positive thinking prophet ever, Norman Vincent Peale, who was actually Trump's pastor or minister or whatever, in church when he was a kid. The power of positive thinking. And this is what the president is saying pretty directly. So if you put it all together, it does seem that the president is now embracing the scientific consensus. The CO2 is a threat. But he's doing it in his Trump way, which in my opinion is perfect. I wouldn't say that about a lot of things. Well, maybe I do say that about a lot of things. But his framing of this, the new frame, where he's sort of evolving to, is really perfect because he's focusing on the optimism versus pessimism. In other words, he's basically saying what I've been telling you. This is a version of the Adams law of slow-moving disasters. If you have a quick disaster and it catches us off guard, us being the United States, us being humanity, if something catches us off guard, well, we could be in trouble. But when the United States and the world in general sees a big problem coming from 50 years away, when we see it coming and we're on the same page, and now we are, President of the United States is very clearly on the same page with the scientific consensus at this point. When you've got that, optimism is the right mindset because it's the optimism that plants you 1 trillion trees. It's the optimism that builds new carbon sucking devices. It's the optimism that gets you to Generation 4 nuclear power. It's the optimism that gets you to everything you need. Pessimism is the wrong mindset to solve the problem. So the president just fully entered in my opinion, he has fully entered the climate topic in a productive way. And the same thing he does every time he enters a topic, he hollows it out and he wears it as a suit. He didn't just enter the contest. He hollowed it out. He redefined it as a war against pessimists and optimists. And he's right. This is a battle between optimists and pessimists. And the pessimists have a mindset which, for all of our human experience we've learned, is not productive. So he's doing the stuff you can do. He's ignoring the stuff that doesn't make any difference. Let's say the Paris Climate Accord didn't make any difference, so he doesn't do it. Planting 1 trillion trees, does that make a difference? Probably yes. Going hard at nuclear energy to get clean power that eats nuclear waste as its own fuel and doesn't melt down, is that someplace we should go? How do you get there? Does pessimism get you to Generation 4 nuclear power? No, it doesn't. It gets you nothing. Pessimism gets you nothing. This president, and I say this until you're tired of hearing it, but what I like about this president is not that he does everything the way I want him to, not that he doesn't break things, not that there isn't some cost to his presidency. There is. He's expensive. He's an expensive president, and I don't just mean Secret Service cost when he goes golfing. He's expensive. He costs us a lot of anguish. People are going to their psychiatrists and stuff like that. But the trade-off is that he has a set of tools that nobody's ever seen before. I mean, you've never seen this before. The President of the United States just paced the hell out of the Republican and conservative parts of this country. He paced them. In other words, he agreed with those who said this climate change stuff looks a little BS-y to us. It's not passing the sniff test. He was right there, right in the middle of it. And this week, he took a new path. Who's going to follow him? Will the Republican Party, the conservatives, let's say the Republicans, who have 95% or something like that, support for this president, do they go with him? Do they go with him? I say yes. I say yes. I say this president just did the greatest thing this country has ever seen, according to AOC. You ready for this? This is not my opinion. I'm imagining an opinion, so it's just my imagination. I'm imagining AOC, and she's looking at this. How long has AOC been trying to convince the rest of the country, the other half, the skeptics, to do something about climate change? Well, it's her main thing. She's been trying really, really hard. How has she succeeded? She hasn't. Why does AOC not change any minds in the Republican Party? Simple. She doesn't pace them. She's only pacing her own team. She's being like them until they trust her, and then they'll move with her because they trust her. President Trump has the trust of conservatives and the GOP. He's been pacing you for years, and he just made a move. It's the biggest move maybe you've ever seen. This is the biggest persuasion play happening right now while you're watching. It's the biggest persuasion play I've ever seen, meaning that it involves the most people at the highest level, and I think it's going to kind of work. Now, obviously, he's not going to get everybody to move over. All the skeptics will dig in. Some of them may start disliking the president for it. But this is the biggest story, and there's nothing even close. Nothing even close. But I like the fact that he's keeping some of the hoax elements to it in terms of our projections of doom. So let's not project doom, because we can't do that. We're the United States, and we are humanity, and we can solve this. And the President of the United States just said, it's real, and we can solve this. And then his team with McCarthy told you some details of how that can happen. And they're actually completely practical. Everything the Republicans are looking at looks entirely practical. Now, maybe AOC would say it's not enough, and that's a productive conversation. We should have that. All right.